Is there a reason my son is being detained? The words cut through the heavy afternoon heat like a blade, calm, cold, and impossible to ignore. And in that instant, the smirk vanished from Officer Malvin's face, replaced by the dawning realization that he had just mocked the wrong child. It was the kind of heat that made everything feel heavy, the sun hanging over Fresno like it was punishing the pavement just for existing. The sidewalk shimmered, and even the breeze felt like it had given up. 11-year-old Isaiah Brooks moved along the edge of Westbury Park with his backpack bouncing gently against his back and the sound of sneakers scuffing against dry concrete. He wasn't in a hurry. His mind was elsewhere, halfway wrapped up in thoughts about the wireless earbuds he'd been saving for. They were slick, deep blue with noise-canceling features and a charging case that looked like something from the future. He'd seen a pair in the school hallway last week, and Jalen's ears, blasting music like the world wasn't watching. Isaiah wanted that, his own music, his own space, just a little freedom you could carry in your pocket. He had a few dollars folded neatly in his wallet, money earned from doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Picking up trash for old Mr. Connors on Sundays, helping Miss Janet carry groceries in exchange for loose change and an occasional cookie. His plan was simple: save a little more, then ask Dad to match the rest if grades stayed good. But that was a conversation for another time. Right now, all that existed was the buzz of heat, the faint bouncing of a basketball somewhere down the block, and the promise of air conditioning waiting at home. That was when he heard it. The low, slow roll of a police cruiser easing up behind him, tires crunching against the edge of the curb like it was sneaking up on something. Isaiah didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes it's better to wait until they make the first move. And they always did. "Hey. You." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried that tone. The one that made your shoulders stiffen before your brain even told them to. Isaiah stopped walking and turned slowly. The officer, a white man with mirrored sunglasses and the kind of tan you only get from working the streets year-round, leaned out the window of the cruiser. His name tag read Malvin. "What are you doing out here?" Isaiah blinked, confused. "Just walking home, sir." "From where?" "The park." "Got any ID on you?" Isaiah tried not to frown. What 11-year-old carried ID to the park? "No, sir. But I live a couple blocks that way. My dad's home if you." "What's your dad do?" Isaiah hesitated. He hadn't expected that. But the answer came out proud, clear, like it always did. "He's in the military. Special Forces." And that's when it happened. That moment, the shift. Malvin laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite smile, but a real, full-throated laugh. Like Isaiah had told him a knock-knock joke instead of the truth. "Special Forces," he repeated, eyebrows raised like he'd just heard a kid say his dad was Batman. "That's cute. What is he, a Navy SEAL too?" Isaiah felt his face go hot. His fists clenched, but he kept them buried deep in his pockets. "Don't move. Don't react. Don't give him a reason." "There's a lot of stolen valor floating around these days," Malvin muttered, mostly to himself but loud enough for Isaiah to hear. Then he opened the door of the cruiser and stepped out. He wasn't a huge man, but he had that presence, like he owned the sidewalk just by standing on it. He walked up, stopped a few feet away, and stared down. "So let me get this straight. Your dad's out here, living in this neighborhood, while doing what exactly? Top secret missions for Uncle Sam?" Isaiah's mouth was dry. He didn't know what to say. He didn't even know if it mattered anymore. "I could call him," Isaiah finally said, voice tight. "He's at home." "Oh, I'd love that," Malvin smirked. "Let's call Captain America." Isaiah fumbled with his phone, sweat slicking his fingers. The device slipped and hit the concrete with a crack that echoed louder than it should have. The screen now wore a web of fractures like a fresh scar. Isaiah's heart dropped. Still, he picked it up and tapped through the haze, pulling up the one number that mattered. Ring. Ring. Then, "Isaiah?" His father's voice cut through the static and the tension like a lifeline. "Yeah, Dad. I'm at the park. This officer, he wants to talk to you." Malvin didn't even look interested anymore. He waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "You can tell him yourself when he gets here," he said, strolling back to lean against the hood of the cruiser. Isaiah stood still, phone pressed to his ear, barely breathing. "I'm coming," Elias Brooks said simply. 5 minutes stretched like an eternity. A couple of teenagers walked by and stared. One of them whispered something and laughed. A woman jogging slowed down, glanced over, then kept moving. Malvin chatted with his partner in the cruiser like this was just another day. He even muttered under his breath, "Kid probably doesn't even have a dad." Isaiah bit the inside of his cheek so hard he tasted blood. And then, it changed. No sirens. No screeching tires. Just a black Chevy Suburban gliding up to the curb like it had all the time in the world. The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Not in uniform. No medals. No hat. Just jeans, a black t-shirt, boots laced tight. But he didn't need a uniform. The way he walked, slow and straight-backed, the way his eyes swept the scene and locked in on Isaiah, it said everything. Elias Brooks was here. Malvin was still talking when he noticed the silence. He turned, mid-laugh, and the smirk slid off his face like someone had wiped it away with a cloth. Elias didn't yell. Didn't raise a hand. He just stepped forward, calm and precise. "Is there a reason my son's being detained?" Malvin blinked. "We got a call. Someone said there was suspicious activity in the area. Just doing a routine check." "A routine check," Elias repeated slowly, looking at Isaiah, then back at the officer. "Of a child walking home from the park." Malvin opened his mouth, then shut it. Elias reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open with one hand. A military ID gleamed in the sunlight. Major Elias Brooks. United States Army. Special Forces. Malvin took a step back. "You don't get to make my son feel like a criminal because you don't believe who his family is," Elias said, voice low and steady. "You don't get to humiliate a child because your ego's too big to fit in your badge." Malvin tried to muster a response. Not everyone's impressed by a uniform. Elias turned fully, eyes sharp as broken glass. "This isn't about uniforms. This is about a grown man thinking it's funny to humiliate a kid for telling the truth." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, like the heat itself had stopped to listen. Isaiah stood there, watching. Not shaking anymore. Not small. Because his father hadn't just shown up. He had shown the truth. The air hadn't moved. It just sat there, thick, stale, and buzzing with something Isaiah couldn't quite name. Maybe it was tension. Maybe it was the way his heartbeat pulsed in his ears louder than the breeze. All he knew was the moment had cracked. Something about Officer Malvin's smirk, the way he leaned back against the cruiser like he owned the whole damn street, the way he'd waved off Isaiah's call like it was nothing, it had all pressed down like a weight on his chest. But now that weight was shifting. Because on the other end of that cracked phone call was his father. And when Major Elias Brooks said, "I'm coming," Isaiah knew the conversation was over. Something bigger than words was on its way. The black Chevy Suburban didn't roar down the road or screech to a dramatic stop. It moved the way his father always did, deliberate, steady, quiet until it wasn't. The engine rumbled low as it glided to the curb, the dark metal catching just enough light to reflect the stunned faces of the onlookers starting to gather. People who'd heard the laughter, seen the way Malvin had talked down to the boy on the sidewalk, were now squinting in the heat to see what came next. The driver's side door opened with a soft click, and out stepped a man who didn't need a badge or a title to make you stop talking. Elias Brooks stood straight, tall but unhurried. His broad shoulders moved like steel beneath the black t-shirt, his jeans neat, boots polished, posture carved from years of discipline. He closed the car door with a quiet finality, then scanned the scene, not frantic, not angry, just calculating. The way his eyes locked on Isaiah, just for a beat, said everything. His son wasn't alone. Not anymore. Malvin was still mid-conversation with his partner, laughing at something shallow and irrelevant, when he noticed the silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just arrive, it replaces things. Laughter. Confidence. Control. The officer turned, saw the man walking toward him, and straightened up instinctively. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, like the last 10 minutes of mockery hadn't happened. Elias didn't answer right away. He came to a stop beside Isaiah, placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, and turned to face the officer. "Is there a reason my son is being detained?" Malvin blinked. He matched a vague description, he said too quickly. "We received a call about a suspicious individual walking through the neighborhood." "He's 11, Elias replied, not raising his voice. "Walking home from the park. In broad daylight." The other officer, slightly younger, still leaning against the hood, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "We were just doing a routine check," Malvin added, trying to recover ground. Elias tilted his head, one brow raised just slightly. Then, without a word, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn, black leather wallet. He flipped it open, held it at chest height. The sunlight caught the badge just enough to make the gold shimmer. Major Elias Brooks. United States Army. Special Forces. The air around them shifted again. This time it wasn't tension. It was recognition. A recalibration. Malvin stepped back, eyes narrowing to get a better look at the ID, but his voice came slower now. "You military?" "I am," Elias said. "And you don't get to humiliate a child because your ego outweighs your authority." Malvin stiffened. "Look, no one was humiliated. We were just—" "No," Elias cut in, his tone still even, still controlled, but edged with something that made everyone nearby hold their breath. "You laughed in his face. Mocked him in public. Dismissed his truth as a fantasy. That's not routine. That's personal." "Not everyone's impressed by a uniform," Malvin muttered, folding his arms across his chest like a wall might protect him. Elias turned his full body now. Looked him dead in the eyes. "This isn't about uniforms. It's about a grown man thinking it's funny to humiliate a kid for telling the truth." The sentence landed like a weight. Isaiah looked up at his dad, the way the sun hit the side of his face, catching every line carved by experience. The crowd had grown. A few parents with their kids, a man in jogging shorts, a woman holding a leash, and a confused terrier, they were all watching. But no one said a word. Malvin opened his mouth like he was about to push back. Maybe instinct. Maybe desperation. But before he could form the first syllable, Elias stepped forward, not close, just enough. "You ever have a kid?" Malvin blinked again. "Excuse me?" "A kid. A son." The officer hesitated. "Yeah," he said after a pause, defensive, unsure. Elias nodded, slowly. "Then maybe take a second to think about how this would have looked if he were your boy standing out here. Sweating in the heat. Phone cracked on the sidewalk. Whole neighborhood watching him get laughed at for believing in you." The words didn't come sharp. They came measured. But they cut deeper than shouting ever could. Isaiah watched Malvin's expression shift. The defensiveness didn't drop entirely, but the smugness evaporated. His partner still hadn't said a word, and now seemed determined not to make eye contact with anyone. "Are we free to go?" Elias asked. Malvin hesitated. Then nodded. "Yeah." "Good," Elias said, placing a hand on Isaiah's back and guiding him toward the Suburban. They walked in silence for a few steps. Isaiah's legs moved slower, his body still processing the sudden shift in power, the crack in the air where fear had lived moments ago. "Dad," he said quietly, stopping beside the car. Elias turned. Thanks. Elias looked at him, studied him for a moment, then opened the passenger door. Get in. As Isaiah slid into the seat, he felt the cool air conditioning sweep over him like a second breath. His dad rounded the hood, climbed in behind the wheel, and sat quietly for a long moment before starting the engine. Behind them, Malvin still stood beside the cruiser, arms now loose at his sides, eyes squinting toward the Suburban like he wasn't sure what just happened. Isaiah didn't turn to look back. He just exhaled. Not because the heat was gone, but because, for the first time that afternoon, it didn't feel like it was all pressing down on his chest. His father pulled away from the curb with the same deliberate calm he'd arrived with. They didn't speak at first. The Suburban moved past familiar streets, past the corner store where Isaiah sometimes bought gum, past the school bus stop, past the park that now felt like a distant memory. Finally, Elias broke the silence. You did good calling me. Isaiah stared out the window. Didn't feel like it at the time. Sometimes it doesn't, Elias said. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right in the moment. But it holds up. Isaiah turned toward him. I didn't think you were going to show up so fast. His father allowed a small smile. I was already on my way. I could feel something was off. The boy looked back at the cracked phone in his lap. The screen had split clean across, like a spiderweb trying to hold together. I wanted to tell him everything, Isaiah said quietly. About the medals. Your deployment. About how you built comms gear in Afghanistan that helped save people. But I knew he wasn't listening. That's because he wasn't, Elias replied. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in control. Is that why you didn't yell at him? Elias gripped the wheel, calm as ever. Because yelling is for people trying to be heard. I didn't need him to hear me. I needed him to feel me. Isaiah nodded, letting the words settle into the quiet space between them. They pulled into the driveway of their modest home, brick exterior, American flag waving gently near the porch. Elias shifted into park but didn't move to open the door. He looked over at his son. You don't ever have to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. Isaiah met his gaze. Let them underestimate you, his father said. Just don't you ever do it too. For the first time all day, Isaiah smiled. Not because it was over, but because he knew he'd stood his ground. And the ground had held. The driveway was quiet when they pulled in. The engine ticked as it cooled, but the stillness between father and son was louder than anything mechanical. Isaiah sat with the cracked phone still in his lap, eyes resting on the spiderweb of fractures running across the screen like some kind of scar that hadn't healed yet. The sun was lower now, the air still thick but losing its fire. His father hadn't said a word since telling him, you don't ever have to shrink so someone else can feel bigger, and Isaiah hadn't needed him to. But as the garage door groaned shut behind them, and the Chevy's engine faded into silence, that lingering question pressed up from inside Isaiah's chest and spilled into the air like it couldn't be held any longer. Dad, he said, his voice just above a whisper, was it right? What I did? Elias didn't answer right away. He unbuckled, reached for the keys, then turned in his seat and looked at his son, not through him, not past him, but right into the small, brave weight he carried. Right, he said slowly, doesn't always come with a reward. It doesn't always get claps. Sometimes it gets silence. Sometimes it gets looks like the one he gave you. Isaiah stared back, trying to process that. His father continued, but right is right. Even when no one recognizes it. The boy nodded, barely. His throat was tight. It didn't feel like it was enough, he said. Like maybe if I had said something smarter or louder. Elias stopped him with a look. You stood there, Isaiah. You didn't lie. You didn't run. You didn't lash out. You called me. You stood in the truth. That's more than most grown men do. Isaiah's chest rose and fell. The words didn't make the knot go away entirely, but they loosened it just enough for him to breathe. They got out of the car and walked into the house. The air inside was cool, familiar. Safe. The kitchen lights buzzed faintly as Elias set his keys on the counter and reached for a glass. Isaiah sat at the table, still, holding his busted phone. He placed it gently in front of him, like it was something sacred. His father poured water and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching him for a moment. "You want to know something?" Elias said. Isaiah looked up. "I've had commanding officers who didn't believe me when I told them what I'd seen in the field. I've had politicians question my reports, even when I brought them data, video, timestamps. You think one man laughing at the truth changes it?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, sir." "Exactly." Elias came over, pulled out the chair beside him, and "Saturday, let me tell you something else. When I walked up and saw you standing there, holding that phone, looking him in the eye, I've never been prouder." Isaiah blinked quickly, then looked down. His father's words sank deep, filling spaces that had felt hollow all day. Later that night, the video surfaced. A neighbor, a man walking his dog, had filmed the last part of the exchange on his phone, starting from the moment Elias approached the cruiser. The clip wasn't long, but it was enough. A young black boy being questioned, mocked, a calm but firm father arriving, a white officer's posture shifting from smug to unsure. The internet didn't need a full-length feature to understand the weight of it. It just needed that moment, truth meeting arrogance. The video spread fast. By morning, it had over 600,000 views. By lunchtime, local news stations were running segments. "Fresno officer under investigation after mocking child," the cheering read. "Father confronts officer who laughed at his son's truth." Isaiah didn't ask to see any of it. But it was there, on the news in the living room, on the screen of his mom's phone when she returned home from her shift, even mentioned in passing by a neighbor across the fence. 2 witnesses came forward, one jogger, one parent from the nearby splash pad. Both filed formal complaints. The department moved quickly. Officer Malvin was placed on administrative leave pending internal review. His partner, Officer Green, received a written reprimand for failing to intervene. The statement from the Fresno Police Department was short, but the message was clear: what happened wasn't being ignored. That night, as the sky dimmed and the house settled into the kind of stillness only evening brings, Isaiah sat at the kitchen table again. His father stood at the stove stirring a pot of rice. His mom leaned against the counter, flipping through her phone but occasionally watching the boy from the corner of her eye. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. She just watched. When Elias finally sat down across from him again, he didn't speak right away. He just reached for the boy's hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around smaller ones. Then, in a voice softer than anything he'd used that day, he said, "You don't need to raise your voice to be heard." Isaiah looked up. But he didn't listen. "He didn't have to," Elias replied. "You weren't talking for him. You were standing for yourself. For your truth. And that doesn't need approval. It just needs courage." Isaiah nodded. And this time, the knot in his chest didn't tighten. It eased. Slowly. Carefully. Like it finally believed him. Outside, the streetlights blinked on. Across the city, people were watching the video, reading the headlines, forming opinions. But none of that mattered more than the moment happening at that kitchen table. The moment when a boy realized he didn't have to shout, didn't have to win an argument, didn't have to beg for respect. Because it was already his. Given to him by the truth. Carried in the way he stood. It didn't matter that Malvin had laughed. It didn't matter that people had doubted. What mattered was that Isaiah never backed down. He didn't flinch when the world tried to minimize him. And that was strength. Real strength. The kind no badge or uniform could give. The next morning, Isaiah went to school as usual. He wore his backpack a little tighter, his shoulders pulled a little higher. A few kids stared. A few whispered. But one girl, Kira, walked up and said, "My dad saw you on TV. He said you were brave." Isaiah just smiled. I told the truth, he said. That afternoon, when the final bell rang and the playground emptied, Isaiah sat on the swings for a while, letting the wind move through the quiet. His phone was still cracked, still broken, but it still worked. Just like him. And maybe that was the lesson. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need permission. And it doesn't break just because someone tried to laugh it away. Isaiah stood, brushed off his jeans, walked home slowly. Not because he was scared, but because now he knew the truth had its own gravity. And when you stand in it, you don't fall. You rise. What happened to Isaiah that hot Saturday afternoon is something no child should ever have to endure. Being questioned simply for walking home. Being laughed at for telling the truth. Being made to feel small for the pride he carried in his father's name. But the most powerful moment wasn't in the confrontation, it was in Isaiah's quiet courage. He didn't fight back with anger. He didn't try to scream louder than the disrespect. He stood his ground. And sometimes, that's the loudest truth of all. There's a lesson here, for all of us. In a world that often rewards noise, performance, and dominance, we forget the strength in stillness. We forget that some of the bravest acts don't come from shouting, but from refusing to be moved. Isaiah didn't need to win an argument. He didn't need to change the officer's mind. He just needed to know who he was, and stand in that truth. That's what we want you to take away from this story. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or disrespected, remember, your truth isn't any smaller just because someone else can't see it. Don't let their ignorance define your worth. Speak with dignity. Stand with honor. Walk with purpose. Because even if the world doesn't clap, even if no one nods in approval, the truth will hold you up. To the parents listening, never underestimate the power of presence. Isaiah's father didn't arrive with fury. He didn't need a badge or a uniform to command respect. He showed up with calm authority and unwavering love. And that changed everything. Sometimes, the most impactful thing we can do for our children is simply show up and let them see that they are not alone. To every young person who's ever been in Isaiah's shoes, you are enough. Your voice matters. And one day, the world will have no choice but to listen. On behalf of our team at U.S. Justice Story, thank you so much for being here, for watching, for listening, and for caring. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own journey or someone you know, we encourage you to share it. Let's remind people that justice isn't always loud, but it is always necessary. And as always, stay brave. Stay kind. And keep standing tall in your truth. We'll see you in the next story.